Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra, Bardhaman, it is my proud privilege this evening to welcome you all at the Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay and Srimati Kanika Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture 2024. Since the inception of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra and following the demise of its founder, Dr. Bhaskar Chattopadhyay, we have annually held a memorial lecture in the name of him and his deceased wife. And over the last few years, following the pandemic, we have often shifted to the online mode. On behalf of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra and his Honorary Secretary, I welcome you all today on this gender-based annual lecture, where we shall be having two speakers, Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty and Mr. Apurba Ghosh. But before we hear them out, I wish to ask our Honorable Vice President, Dr. Shukriti Ghoshal, to kindly introduce to you all Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra and what they have been doing as an organization, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary research organization over the last few years. So now it is over to our dear Dr. Shukriti Ghoshal, Vice President of BVCK. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. I welcome you all to Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay and Srimati Kanika Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture organized by Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra this evening. Every year, the introductory words are spoken by the director of this organization, Professor Joydev Sarkel, who was very close to Professor Chattopadhyay and who has been with this association from the very inception. This year, he is ill and therefore I have been asked to introduce our organization to the listeners, to the audience. Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra was founded in 2000. That year, Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay retired from his service. He was the professor of history, Bardhaman University, a legendary teacher. And he also thought of bringing in an institution, an association, which will be dedicated to the cultivation and dissemination of knowledge, especially in the humanities discipline. And that association has been named as Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra, and it was registered in 2001. This association, this academic platform is the brainchild of our legendary teacher, Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay. And this particular association is dedicated from the very inception to interdisciplinary study. Though Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay was a professor of history, but it is a platform not for the history teachers and history scholars alone. In 2016, Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay left us all, and a vacuum was created, never to be filled up. And the students, some students and colleagues of Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay thought that the most befitting homage to this legendary teacher would be to continue his legacy and to continue the activities of this platform, Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra. Though the initial enthusiasm had subsided for some years, but the association is still active and also not only alive but active as well. Every year, Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra publishes an interdisciplinary journal called Bharat Vidya, a bilingual peer-reviewed journal of desirable standard. Apart from that, edited volumes, especially on a particular theme, sometimes a collection of the essays presented at a conference, is published every year. And in addition to that, every year, Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra organizes a memorial lecture. The memorial lecture is called, as you have already heard, Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay and Srimati Kanika Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. In this memorial lecture, we usually choose a gender related theme, and we invite some teachers of repute and scholars, because Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra was one of the objectives was to promote the young scholars. We invite teachers and scholars to enlighten the audience on a particular on the theme that is picked up for discussion at the memorial lecture every year. This evening, we have with us Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty, who is an assistant professor of history of the University of Bardhaman, and he will be discussing binary and non-binary gender of the colonial period. We have also with us this evening another co-speaker, we may say, Mr. Apurba Ghosh, a research scholar of the of Colonial University, and he will be discussing tracing colonial queer history through vernacular literature. It is my privilege to welcome both the speakers to this memorial lecture session. I sincerely hope that their scholarly deliberation will be enriching to us all. Now I invite Professor Soumitra Rai, Secretary, Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra, to introduce the speakers one by one and also to conduct the discussion session in a way that creates, that the audience gets some time for interacting with the speakers. Thank you all, and over to Dr. Soumitra Rai.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghoshal, for your very kind words and in introducing our organization. Every year, along with all these academic activities that we perform, we have also taken up this task of felicitating two young girl students, one who has done well at Madhyamik level and another who has done well at the HS level, who come from very economically challenged backgrounds. And in our own way, we try to help them out with a token of appreciation, a medallion, and a token amount of money. For 2024, the felicitations and the recipients were Momi Shatra for the Madhyamik, who belonged to Kanchannagar D.N. Das High School, Bardhaman. And with regard to HS, we had chosen Priyanka Rajok, who was a student of Shiv Kumar Harijan Uच्च Vidyalaya, Bardhaman. We once again take this occasion of the memorial lecture to congratulate Momi Shatra and Priyanka Rajok on their success and wish them all the best for their long academic journey ahead. Now, as per protocol now, it is my very kind privilege to introduce to you all Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty, who is an assistant professor in the Department of History, the University of Bardhaman. Dr. Chakrabarty had previously worked as lecturer or assistant professor and head of the Department of History at Krishnath College, Beharampur, Murshidabad, from 2005 to 2012. And then he had shifted to Sidhu Kanubirsha University, Purulia, He had worked as assistant professor of history from 2012 to 2016. And then in 2016, he had joined the University of Burdwan. Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty has the distinction of being awarded the Professor B.B. Chaudhary Prize for Best Paper in the section on Social and Economic History of India, presented at the 71st session of the Indian History Congress 2011. He holds a PhD degree from the University of Kalyani under the supervision of the former Vice Chancellor of Bardhaman University, Professor Smriti Kumar Sharkar. The topic of his PhD was From Cantonment to Divisional Headquarter, Berhampur, a case study of urbanization in rural area. Without much more ado, I now request Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty to deliver his lecture for the evening. Sir, the floor is all yours. Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Omitruda. First of all, I must thank our Vice President, who is also present here, the Secretary of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra, and other members who are present for giving me this opportunity to deliver the lecture, this memorial lecture. I'm specially privileged because Dr. Chattopadhyay was an illustrious professor of the same department in which I am teaching at present. So I feel very privileged to be able to appear before you and say something about gender. Now, what I am going to speak about today is how, after the establishment of colonial rule in India, how the construction of gender changed. Both binary and non-binary genders, how it changed. Now, when the British established their rule in India, they presented themselves, or the self-image that they had of themselves is that they were much more manly. And the Indians whom they dominated, they were not that manly, or rather they were effeminate, or they were girlish. This is because the common perception about gender is that the man dominates and the woman is dominated. So the general idea among the English were that they are the manly people, and the Indians whom they were ruling, they were effeminate, they were not that manly, and that was why they are under colonial rule. So this is an image that the Englishmen had in their mind from the very beginning. Secondly, what we see is that among the Indians, they divided the Indians into two categories. One is the martial races and the other is the non-martial races. Now, this martial races theory, it actually originated in England itself. In England, some of the people, like the Scottish Highlanders, they were considered more ferocious in battle, and as they were more ferocious in battle, they were considered to be martial, and others in Britain were considered non-martial. So when they established their rule in India, they brought this framework with them, and in India they divided Indians into two categories: the martial races and the non-martial races. The martial races were like the Baluch, the Gadwalis, the Gorkhas, the Marathas, the Pathans, the Rajputs, the Sikhs. They were the martial races, and the non-martial races were people like Bengalis, Urias, Assamese. They were considered non-martial races. Now, one is that the framework that had developed in Britain were placed in India. Another thing is that the revolt of 1857, that also had a role. Those people who had supported the British, who were loyal to the British, the British considered that yes, these are real men. They have supported us. They are real men. They are true to their word. We have employed them and they have supported us. And those who are not supporting them, like mainly the Bengal army had revolted against the British, so they were not that manly. They had not kept their word, or they had not served their masters in the period of crisis. So the revolt of 1857, that also played a very important role. Now, uh, in this context, the most interesting work on colonial masculinity, as we all know, has been done probably by Milalini Sinha. We all know this. This on the book on colonial masculinity. We must all have read this. So this is a very good work on how this masculinity was constructed by the British. One thing, as we are all Bengalis, probably most of us who are here are Bengalis, the the view about the Bengalis were that the Bengalis were very effeminate. They were non-martial and they were totally effeminate. When Lord Curzon comes to Bengal as the Governor General of India, he once had been riding with his wife, and while they were riding, the Lord Curzon and his wife, Lord Curzon saw some people, they were standing in a distance. Lord Curzon points out to his wife that, you see, these people are Bengalis. Do you know who are Bengalis? The Bengalis are effeminate and garrulous people. So this is Lord Curzon's version of who Bengalis are. So Lord Curzon very specifically mentions to his wife that, see, these are Bengalis. These people, those standing in the distance, they are Bengalis. They can't fight. They only talk. They are effeminate and garrulous people. So this is the view that Lord Curzon had, or rather the British administration had, of Bengalis. Now, this also had an impact on the Indians, especially the Bengalis. Now, after Lord Curzon's partitions Bengal, we see that a lot of secret societies grew up throughout Bengal, and all these secret societies, they gave importance to physical culture. It was a must that they need to develop their physics. So this idea that the rulers, the colonizers, their idea was also influencing the Bengalis. The Bengalis were also somehow feeling that yes, we are not that manly, and in order to fight the British, we need to develop our physique. And this is why we see that in all the secret societies, if we read the history of secret societies, we see that in the front there were gymnasiums and place for lathi khela, kusti and all, and behind that secret work was going on. So this is how the British categorized the male, or the men of India. Now let us come to women. The British rulers, in order to justify or legitimize their rule in India, they stated that they are in India with a civilizing mission. Indians are uncivilized, and their uncivilized nature is best brought out by the treatment that is meted out to women. And we see that throughout the 19th century, various legislations were being passed for development of or uplifting the condition of women. This was done, yes, there were utilitarianism behind it, everything behind it, but it was for the English name, that they are civilizing the Indians and the Indians are uncivilized. The best example of that is that they are not treating their women in a proper way. So we see that the Sati Abolition Act passed in 1829, the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act passed in 1856, Act 3 1872. Now, in Act 3 of 1872, it is very important. If you read the Act, this is the first act. This is the first act in India in which the consent of the husband and the wife for marriage was necessary. In no other Indian system was in no previous system this was not mentioned that the wife will have to give consent. So we see that Act 3 in some ways were a very what to say, it was to some extent it gave equal rights to women also. Then we see the Age of Consent Act of 1891, which had led to a lot of controversies, as we know that it was uh, it stated that the nationalists vehemently opposed this act, and most importantly, Bidashagar also had asked the government not to step into or not to pass this act, which is rather a bit strange. Now, what we see is that these acts were passed, but certain acts which the Indians wanted were not passed also. For example, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar had repeatedly asked the government to stop polygamy. Repeatedly, memorandums were sent by Vidyasagar, the government had set up a committee, etc., but polygamy was not stopped by the British government. So it is because the British thought that this may again lead to a revolt and things like that. So the British desisted from passing that act. And also, when Vidyasagar had asked for raising the age of marriage in the beginning, that was also not accepted. So the British were presenting things in a way that they were actually trying to develop the condition of women. They were on a civilizing mission, but they passed acts which were to their advantage. And also, when Vidyasagar started schools for girl child, those were also not funded by the British government. Though we all know that though the then Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, Halliday, had verbally supported Vidyasagar, but later the Director of Public Instructions, he said that no funds can be given. So when it is coming to funds, the British government is not giving funds for girls' education. So the British policy about women is very dicey. Now, this is one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is more horrendous. Now, we see that the poorest of the Indian women who had no way but to sell their bodies, I am talking about sex workers, for them, what the British government is doing. The British government passed the Cantonment Act, as we all know, in 1864, and what it's very specifically stated that in all the cantonments there would be 12 to 15 Indian women who would only be able to consort with the British army men and with no one else, and for them they will be given license. It further stated that they will have to undergo medical treatment once every week, and if it was found that they had contacted any venereal disease, then they will be quarantined, or rather they would be sort of put in a jail. On the other hand, the army men who even if they had contacted any venereal disease, they were not quarantined. So it is the women who were quarantined. So you see that the poorer women, now the earlier acts which we were talking about, the Widow Remarriage Act, the Sati Act, the Act 3 of 1872, Age of Consent Act, all these acts were targeting middle class women. So, towards the middle class women, the British had one type of policy. Towards the poorer women, who were even poor, who had nothing else but to sell their bodies, the British had another sort of rules. And apart from this, we see that apart from the Cantonment Act, the Contagious Diseases Act was also passed. So, and by these acts, a policing, one policing of the poorer women who were selling their bodies for their to fill up their stomachs, they were in various ways they were tortured by the British regime. So this is how the British were acting. They had this double standard. For the middle class women, they or the upper class women, they are trying to show that yes, we are on a civilizing mission, we are trying to uplift the women. But for the poorer women who had no support, they were they were totally under strict vigil, and they were tortured in a sense, because it was very natural that these women, most of them, they contacted diseases and they were quarantined, and were they were in a sense they became prisoners in the end. So this is what was happening in British India. So and it is interesting that the British army men who were contracting the diseases, there was no punishment for them. They were not quarantined. They were free. They moved around. So this is what the British was doing. Now, what we see that with the beginning of the nationalist movement, this British policy of providing prostitutes to the cantonments, this came under severe criticism. And also the missionaries, they were also criticizing this. And as a result, we see that another Cantonment Act was passed in 1895, which stopped this practice of giving license for sex work, or this stop this prostitution in the cantonments, though this was vehemently opposed by the army men. But however, we see that this was done, ultimately this was done away with. So we see that, but some steps were taken by the missionaries, we see, who were genuinely Christian missionaries, who were genuinely concerned about prostitution in the Indian Empire. And one of them, Amy Carmichael, she was a Protestant missionary of the Church of England, Genoa Missionary Society, and she focused her attention totally on stopping prostitution, not only in the cantonments but also in the temples. That was there also in the temples. She was very much opposed to Devdashi system, which in a sense was all child prostitution, and she vehemently opposed this, and she created a fellowship also. This is Donware Fellowship, in which she saved lot of girls from prostitution. So what we see that the colonial government had many faces. They had many faces, and but what we see that genuine concern for sex workers, girls who were into prostitution, was shown by missionaries. To some extent, missionaries came forward, and though we don't pay much attention to them, like women like or missionaries like Amy Carmichael, they really did a commendable work standing at that time, at that period. Now, after we talked about men and women, we should now turn our attention to the third gender. Now, third gender or transgender or LGBTQ, whatever way we see these things, these people, they existed in Indian society, in Indian culture throughout history. Now, what we see that after the colonial state, or after British came to power, to the Western civilization is very much they believe in gender binary. There is no space for third gender. In Indian system, we see that there is a space for third gender, because from the Jaina texts we see that Jaina texts had long before said that there are three types of genders. Later on, we in our epics, in our law books, in the Dharma Shastras, we find lot of examples of third gender people, and Apurva will be speaking much more on this. I am not going into very much details of the things, but what some things I wish to mention here, that with the coming of the British to the British, especially the hijras. Now the hijras and the khojas, the khojas were there, who were castrated males who were used to guard the harems, and the hijras are different from them. They are not the same, though both the terms are Persian terms. Hijra and khoja both are Persian terms. To the British, these these hijras, they seemed to be a problem. Why? Firstly, the British couldn't place them either in the male category or in the female category. Secondly, this population was mobile population. Hijras generally they move around. So for the British it was very difficult to locate them, and for the British the British thought them to be a law and order disrupting people. Now, moreover, the British thought that the hijras, they couldn't reproduce naturally. So, according to the British, they were, it may be true also, that they were abducting boys, young boys, and they were castrating them so that this line continues. So, the British passed a law which is the Criminal Tribes Act in 1871. This act was passed for Northwestern Province specifically. First of all, it was in the Northwestern Province, and in the Part B of that Criminal Tribes Act, the hijras were criminalized. It was stated that the hijras were doing two types of crimes. One is they were abducting young boys, they were castrating them, and secondly, they were involved in sodomy. So both of these were crimes, and they tried to disseminate the whole population. Their plan was to erase the whole Hijra population, and Jessica Henchy, she has done excellent work on this, on how the British government was dealing with the Hijras. So this is one of the this is how the British was dealing with them, with the Hijra community. The British had tried to totally disseminate the Hijra community. So this was their plan. Another very important act which the British had passed, or rather Macaulay had passed. Macaulay was given after the revolt of 1857. The British thought, when the Crown took over India's control, the British government thought that there should be a code of laws. And we see that in 1860, Macaulay was given the responsibility of framing the IPC, Indian Penal Code. Now, in this Indian Penal Code, there is this section 377. This section 377 was modeled on Bagodi Act, which was passed in the 16th century in England. Now, what this stated, what section 377 stated, it stated that anyone who has non-procreative sex, will be punished. They will be punished with fine and up to 10 years of imprisonment. According to the British, they thought that sex was for procreation. In Indian system, we Indians, they recognize that sex was for procreation as well as recreation. But in Western ideas, sex was for procreation, and any non-procreative sex which people engage in, like anal sex or oral sex, if anyone engages in this sort of sexual activities, they will be punished. They will be heavily punished. And this is what we see was taking place. And the British were always very they were always very afraid, rather, that the British soldiers or the British civilians were coming to India, because much more men from Britain were coming to India and much less women were coming to India. So the British always had this fear that the British men, they may get into oriental vice, or rather they may get into homosexual behavior. This was a constant fear of the British, and to to stop this, they had taken various measures. And also another threat which the British felt is that in the prisons, in the jails, as we know that in the jails there is gender segregation. There is male and female, they are kept separately. So the British were afraid that homosexuality or lesbianism may develop in the jails. So there is extensive archival data on these, which I can't tell everything in this short period of time. But what we see is that, for example, in the Andamans, in the cellular jail, we see that the British thought of setting up a penal colony there, and they are sending women convicts from mainland India to Andaman, so that men and women from there, they cohabit and they create a colony of and men don't get into homosexual practice. So these are, and it was during the British period which we see that this juvenile jail was developed, because in many cases we see that the older men, they were using the younger uh, convicts to satisfy their lust. So from there, the British thought that to save this younger people, they need to set up separate centers, separate jails, separate juvenile jails. So a whole lot of work has taken place on this. So I am just saying it very briefly, because I can't uh, tell everything. There is time constraint. So to conclude, we may say that what are the things that we can say? Firstly, we see that the colonial rulers considered themselves superior and manly, and the natives as inferior and effeminate, because they were ruling over the natives. Indian races, they were divided into martial and non-martial races. As part of the civilizing mission, the colonial rulers passed various legislations for the upliftment of the condition of women throughout the 19th century. But these women were middle class women, that must be mentioned. Legislations were passed to control women prostitutes. So those were strict, very strict regulations for poorer women who had nothing but to sell their bodies. Christian missionaries or non state Western actors were more genuinely concerned about the fate of fallen women in India, as I said. And colonial rule imposed strict binary gender division in India and tried at most to control non binary sexual and gender practices that were prevalent in India since times immemorial. So I think I have taken up the time that was allotted to me, 35 minutes. So I think I should stop here because we have another speaker. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty, for a very wonderful presentation. It's always very difficult to talk on gender because it's so exhaustive. The whole topic is so exhaustive. It's very difficult to talk on gender in such a short span of time. But we appreciate your efforts at trying to bring together the varied facets of a very large discourse. So, from the core of our heart, we thank Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty for a wonderful presentation. If there are questions, we shall be taking them at the end of this program. Thank you so much, Dr. Chakrabarty. It is now my privilege to introduce to you all Mr. Apurba Ghosh, who is doing his PhD at the Department of History, University of Colonial. Apurba belongs to that category of young, bright minds whom Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra welcomes with open arms. One of the visions of Dr. Bhaskar Chattopadhyay was that he wanted BVCK to become a platform for young, fresh minds. And as part of that progression, we are extremely thrilled to introduce to you all Apurba, who shall be talking on Chhele, Bayose and Chaklet, tracing the queer history of colonial India through vernacular literature. Very obviously, Dr. Rajarshi Chakrabarty has already mentioned that there are parts of his lecture which Apurba shall be amplifying upon in his own way. So now, Apurba, the floor is all yours. We welcome you to make your presentation.
Am I audible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please
First,
start.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Soumitra Roy and the entire team of Bharat Vidya Charcha Kendra, and especially to Rajarshi Chakrabarty sir for giving me such an opportunity to be part of this precious memorial lecture. Now, the title of my today's lecture is Chhele, Bayose and Chaklet, Tracing the Queer History of Colonial India Through Vernacular Literature. The sources for writing the queer history or alternative sexuality of colonial India are very limited. I think from very beginning, I should clarify the term queer. The term queer has multidimensional way of uses and meanings. Queer theories use the term queer to denote not any identity but a philosophy, the philosophy which can to some extent can challenge the heteronormative norms of the society. On the other hand, some of the scholars use the term queer as to denote the alternative sexual and gender identities. Here, I use the term queer to denote the alternative sexuality only. Okay. Now, the colonial archival records are almost silent and contested regarding the alternative sexuality and gender. In this situation, vernacular literature on the theme of homosexuality can act as an alternative source to trace the history of homosexuality in colonial India. Through my today's lecture, I would try to show the representation of queer history and queer scenario of colonial India colonial Bengal, in Shibram Chakrabarty's Bangla novel Chhele Bayose, which was published in 1925, and colonial North India in Pandey Bechan Sharma's Chaklet, which is an anthology of short stories in Hindi language published in 1927. Now, there are numerous gaps and omissions in the archives of colonial India on homosexuality or alternative sexuality, which has been discussed in detail by by Anjali Arndenkar in her book titled "For the Record on Sexuality and the Colonial Archive in India." I am not going to detail about it. However, these gaps can be filled up to some extent by the vernacular literature to trace the history of homosexuality and understand the queer scenario in colonial India. Traditional history writings were often based on the archival records, where literature, more specifically vernacular literature, was considered as outcast. Actually, it was the colonial intellectuals and their modernity which made a rigid demarcation between the fact which was supposed to be history and the fiction which was supposed to be literature. Sorry. This somehow made a fixed rule that history should be written only on the basis of archival records. Now, Derrida has termed this fashion of excessive emphasis on archives as archive fever. This archive fever resulted into the marginalization of all those records in history writing which failed to enter the archives. However, nowadays, vernacular literature and such writings are widely being used by the scholars in history writing in all over the world, including India. Scholars like Rudvanita, Salim Kidwai, Giti Thadani have used vernacular literature to trace the existence of queer identities in ancient, medieval, and to some extent modern India. Now, in this context of colonial Bengal, eminent Bengali writer Shibram Chakrabarty in his novel titled Chhele Bayose gives a vivid picture of same-sex relationships that sometimes developed in the school hostels or boarding schools. Colonial Bangla literature had never dealt on the topic of alternative sexuality or same-sex love in such an open manner before. Alongside the ideas about the legitimacy of heteronormative sexuality, he has effectively and thoroughly examined the broader realm of premarital adolescent love and alternative sex lives of a faction of Bengali men in colonial Bengal. The characters could be definitely imaginative, but the prime issue of the novel, that is same-sex love among the young boys, was not completely imaginative. Rather, the issue was very prevalent subject which has been mentioned by Shibram in the preface section of the novel. And I quote from the text. I quote, "I have tried to draw the mysterious part of Bengali young boys. Perhaps no one has ever written about it before in our literature. Usually the story of a novel starts from the adulthood of hero and heroine, and the story reaches its climax after the marriage of the hero and heroine. But I want to show that even before the marriage, many mysterious things happen in people's lives. But what is true never becomes a lie if no one considered it as true or turns a blind eye. Perhaps I shall be accused in the court of literature for grave crime of speaking the factual truth and may suffer severe punishment." It means that Shibram already knew that the portrayal of homosexuality in literature would not be accepted in society. But despite being aware enough about the societal mentality of contemporary colonial Bengal regarding homosexuality, Shibram, through his novel, has resolutely presented the history of homosexuality, which has shed light on the intimate lives of teenage boys, various aspects of their mutual intimacy in hostel life or boarding schools, same-sex consensual love or sex, and even the forced homosexuality in the hostels. Shibram has mentioned two types of homosexuality in the novel. First, the intimate consensual same-sex friendships and love between the teenagers of the same or nearly the same age, which develops between the two teenage characters of the novel, namely Ashanto and Mohan, and also between Ashanto and another character named Demed. Secondly, the prevalence of forced homosexuality in Hostel, which has been depicted through the character of another teenage boy named Tares, who forcefully establishes sexual acts with Mohan. The opening of the novel shows that two young teenagers named Ashanto Bandyopadhyay Ashanto and the Mohanlal Bosu's Mohan developing an intense love for each other at first sight in the cinema hall, though they are separated for some times after their first meeting. Later on, they got united in Malda. Meanwhile, another love interest named Devin in the life of Ashanto comes. Devin, a first-year college student, meets Ashanto while watching a play at the Star Theatre, Calcutta. The two become attracted to each other through physical contact while watching the play together. Their same-sex love is culminated when they met at Devin's sister's wedding night. They share the same bed and their passion turns into the physical union. And I quote, an hour later, Devin came back and took shelter in bed. The lamp next to the bed was still burning. In the light, he saw the boy's small face well. He stretched his hands and turned the lamp down a bit, then gave a gentle kiss on the soft cheek of the boy. Ashanto wrapped his arm around his neck, Devin pulled him closer to his chest, in his mouth, in his whole body. Rejoicing in the taste of an unprecedented pleasure, they dawned the night of the month of Posh. A few months later, while watching a football match in Malda, Ashanto meets his former love, Mohan. Gradually, their love grows stronger and they come closer to each other through regular meeting as they attend the same school and hostel in Malda. Like two lovers of the same heart, they both go for a walk to the riverside every afternoon. They enjoy each other's emotional and physical intimacy and gradually become more and more closer to each other. Now there is a intimate scene between Ashanta and Mohan while they went to the riverside, and I quote that scene. And I quote, upon arriving at the location near the river, Mohan rested his head on Ashanto's lap. Ashanta held him tightly in his lap, pressed his cheek to Mohan's curly hair, not letting him get up. Mohan's heart became happy in an instant. Ashanto's heart was filled with emotion. He hugged Mohan's neck, pulled his face very close to his own, kissed deeply on his rose-colored lips. Suddenly, something unexpected was happening, which was not in their imagination. The touch of that sudden thing made both of them fall into a dream. Through the above-mentioned account, the mutual love, passion, and intimacy of the two teenagers have been depicted very practically. In the novel, author has also highlighted the tension between the same-sex love emotion and homophobia prevalent in colonial Bengali society. It has been seen in the novel how in a calm late afternoon, the two boys, Ashanto and Mohan, who are deeply in love, are abruptly shocked and humiliated by a violent crime of mutual lip kissing. And I quote, as if they had suddenly committed any crime. Both of them could not look at each other for a while. There was a momentary storm in their simple relationships. Needless to say that this kind of simple relationship was a normal form of traditional gender sexual norms and part of social relation in pre-colonial Bengal, which was suddenly transformed into crime by the British government introduced law, that is the section 377 of Indian Penal Code, and the Victorian morality. But it is also true that the colonial state's anti-homosexual law and surveillance did not completely suppress individuals' love and intimate sexual impulses. For example, the colonial government surveillance on various panopticon institutions such as prisons was not always completely successful. That we can know through the research of David Arnold. So, parallel to this surveillance, the trend of alternative sexual practices and same-sex love were equally present in the society of colonial Bengal and India in general. As a result, in the novel, it can be seen that sharing the same bed by two boys was prohibited in the hostel, but Mohan and Ashanto ignored it, which has been revealed through the Ashanto's words to Mohan. And I quote, Mohan said, "Sleeping together is prohibited. Do you know?" Ashanto replied, "How much we adhere to rules of the boarding." Actually, they ridicules about it by breaching the hostel rule. Mohan and Ashanto have lost themselves in search for physical pleasure, overcoming the temporary hesitation and feeling of guilt. In the novel, in addition to the consensual homosexual relations the relation between Mohan and Ashanto, Shivam has highlighted another type of homosexuality, that is forced homosexuality. Through the Chhele Shikariyar boy hunter character named Taresh, a hostel mate and senior of both Ashanto and Mohan, the author has portrayed the caricature of this forced homosexuality and anal sex prevalent in boarding schools and hostels in contemporary Bengal. Taresh is polygamous and has had non-consensual homosexual relations with several students in hostel and outside the hostel. Being a non-benevolent boy, once he comes to serve the physically ill Mohan, but due to his sudden sexual desire, he forcefully engages in physical intercourse with him. Through the narration of Taresh's activities, the author has also tried to convey that homosexuality was prevalent among a significant section of adolescent boys in Bengal at that time. In this context, Taresh, being experienced in homosexuality, says to one of his classmates named Satish, and I quote, "This is their age of achieving adulthood. There are no boys of this age left unharmed or intact in Bengal anymore." Unquote. Boys' hostels or student messes are important homosocial sites in colonial Bengal. In the new Western education system and social structure, these sites such as boarding schools, boys' hostels, or messes were developed. Even messes or the mess baris were also developed for men coming for employment in the urban area of Calcutta from the other areas of Bengal. Even if the environment of these hostels or messes were not prison-like, the filthy and challenging living conditions in those hostels and mess baris, along with unchallenged independence outside the joint family system, often drew many young students to engage in different recreational activities like drinking, multifaceted sexual activities, etc. In a world without women, young boys of hostel and messes frequently became each other's friend in both happiness and sorrow, and sometimes there were possibilities of these long-term friendships and cohabitation to grow into deep psychophysical empathetic ties. The late 19th century and the first half of 20th century saw a sudden increase in the prevalence of various sexually transmitted diseases among the students' society in different student messes in Calcutta. The prevalence of syphilis was particularly high among the students who came from rural or semi-rural areas. Housing of many students together in different student messes, uncleanliness, excessive or careless sex life were the main reasons, main causes of syphilis. And about it, an article was published in Chikitsa Sammeli. It was a health related periodical in 1892. Some researchers of that time did not accept that environmental factors alone were the cause of Bengali youth's excessive lust and sexual immorality. For the prevalence of homosexual activities in the student society, the European doctor, Dr. Forel, pointed out the hereditary or the genetic factor as sole cause. Forel's research on Bengal youth focused on the fact that rather than indulging in situational homosexuality due to the influence of bad friends, Bengali students often engage in various unconventional sexual acts as a result of genetic or hereditary reasons. Sorry. The seeds of this were often transmitted from the parents to the children. While Dr. Forel's this explanation may seem controversial and unscientific, it is undeniable from this account that multifaceted sexual activities, including homosexuality, were prevalent in a section of student society at that time in Bengal. Apart from Bengal, some references of homosexual practices among the students in other parts of colonial India have also been found. Uh, uh, in this write-up, I have mentioned about the prevalence of homosexual activities in the Church Missionary Society in Srinagar during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And also I have mentioned an autobiography of KPS Menon. KPS Menon was an Indian diplomat, and he wrote about his homosexual encounter in his school days in Kerala, Kottayam. That place was Kottayam, uh, uh, and he wrote that during the early 20th century, when he was in school, he faced homosexual experiences, and also he had a relationship with a young student. So I'm not going into detail about it. Now I would focus Chaklet. In regarding the history of homosexuality in colonial North India, Pandey Bechan Sharma Ugro's Chaklet. Now Ugro was a pen name of Pandey Bechan Sharma. Okay. Now Ugro Chaklet, which was published in 1927 from Calcutta, is very important to trace the alternative sexual world or activities in colonial North India. Chaklet is an anthology of 8 short stories, which was written and edited by Ugro, as I earlier mentioned. These 8 short stories are He Sukumar, Babichari Pyar, Jail Mein, Chocolate, Palat, Hum Fidaye Lucknow, Kamariya Nagin Se Balkhaye, and Chocolate Chorcha. Now here I am to mention, and I have an apology that, I went through the Hindi text, but as my etymological knowledge on Hindi is not much good, so I have mostly depend on English translation, translated by Ruth Vanita. Okay. All these stories, the backdrop of all these 8 short stories is colonial North India. And Ugro was himself from North India. In all the stories of Chocolate, Ugro portrayed homosexual relationships between adult men and young boys in sensual way, but with condemnations. Ugro, in the foreword of the book, clearly mentioned that characters and facts of his Chocolate stories were taken from the real life incidents. Even he has challenged that if anyone came forward and proved that whatever he had written on homosexuality was wrong, he would change his writing. The chocolates are the center of all these stories. Now the point is, who are these chocolates? In colonial UP or United Provinces, young, effeminate boys were often termed by the adult homosexual men as chocolate, pocketbook, or money order. These are the sign language. In the story of Chocolate, a character named Manohar Chandra explained the narrator about the chocolates. And I quote, Chocolate is the name for this innocent, uh, uh, tender and beautiful boys of our country whom society's demons, that is homosexual adult men, push into the mouth of destruction to quench their own desire. Highly respectable people in our society destroy boys and make them bad character. About why the young beautiful boys became chocolate is also explained by Monohar. And I quote, the youth of this country are becoming effeminate. When a boy sees that many people are attracted to one of his companions, he too tries to imitate that companion. He starts trying to become a chocolate by using vanilla and then white rose and then pear show. Instead of studying, boys spend their time trying to look beautiful. And once they fall into the trade of beauty, their intellect is weakened, their desire is strengthened, and they develop loathsome habits. Many boys are destroyed because of their guardians' incompetence. Most guardians do not try to reform the secret lives of their sons. Homosexual relation between an educated adult man, Babu Dinkar Prasad, and his chocolate Ramesh has been portrayed by Ugro in the story Chaklet. Uh, the story Palat, first published in Matwala on 19 July 1924, start from a cinema hall. Uh, uh, Mahashayji or Sriramcharan, a homosexual man, along with his few fellow friends, go to a cinema hall where he finds a young boy named Harishundar Burma, son of the local collector Ram Manohar Burma. Mahashayji makes Harishundar his chocolate or kept boy. After a few months, Harishundar dies due to a disease called tuberculosis. The narrator of this story accuses Mahashayji for Harishandar's death. The next story, Hum Fidaya Lucknow, starts from a boys' school in Lucknow, where a homosexual school teacher named Prasad Babu joins as an assistant teacher. From the narrator, Harihar Babu, who is also a fellow colleague and college friend of Prasad Babu, it is also get revealed that Prasad's homosexual behavior started from his college days. Prasad tells Harihar that he has other options but has come in this particular school as there he finds a lot of chocolates, that is, young, effeminate boys. Soon Prasad gets involved with homosexual activities with his students, and most of his colleagues are against him. Ultimately, once Prasad is found with a student in his home in an intimate situation by the narrator, Harihar. Subsequently, he is dismissed from the job and he is forced to go to Calcutta for earning livelihood. But 1 year later, once the narrator finds a newspaper from Calcutta that Prasad gets imprisonment for 7 years, as there in Calcutta, he tried to make sexual relation with a young boy of a local businessman. In the story Kamariya Naginsi Valkai, first published in Matwala on 6 December 1924, it is seen that a homosexually inclined man, Harnarayan, finds a young boy named Ramu from a local theatre group. He and his such other friends try to enjoy the sexual pleasure from the boy. By taking it in mind, once Harnarayan and his friends arrange a secret sex party in Harnarayan's house. But police catches all these people red-handed as the narrator, who is also a friend of Harnarayan's, informed the police about the secret party. You know, Ugro had personal experience as a child artist in theatre during the first 2 decades of 20th century. In his autobiography Apni Khabar, he talked about his personal experience, that how the young boy actors of the theatre groups in UP or North India used to consider the sexual object by many men. The next story is Chocolate Chorcha. Uh, This story was first published in Matwala on 13 December 1924. The story begins with the scenes from a railway station and train compartment. In a train compartment, few co-passengers, all men, start discussion on chocolates and the bad impacts of homosexuality among the youth. A young college student named Dinkar tells the other passengers about the existence of homosexuality in college. He narrates the story that how much trouble he had to face in the college where senior boys harass him. Not only he, other such good-looking boys were also got harassed by them sexually, as he mentioned. Ultimately, Dinkar says he had to quit the college to get rid of such problems. Apart from college, homosexual behaviors in colonial jails has also been portrayed by Ugro in the story Jailmate. The narrator, a political prisoner of a colonial jail, narrates the story. He comes to know that in the prison, two Muslim jailmates fight with each other over the right of a young male convict. Another prisoner named Suku tells the narrator about the very prevalence of homosexuality in colonial jails, and I quote, "They are helpless. They means the prisoners. After suppressing eros in the heart for 8, 10, or 12 years, these crude prisoners, ignorant of the subtleties of Puritan impurity, and do such things. This vice is very common in jails, whether it is here in Punjab, in Bengal, or in Andamans. This has never been stopped, never can be stopped." And the last story is Babichari Pya. Like Chaklet, in Babichari Pya, Ugro portrays homosexual relation between a mature man and a young boy. The central character of this story is a rich young landlord named Kollan Chandra. He suddenly falls in love with a poor tenant's teenage boy living in under his state. I am not going into detail about the story. Uh, the ancient and medieval Indian text or literature to some extent have revealed the history of same-sex sexuality in pre-colonial India. But chocolate is something different. Because chocolate highlighted the fact that there are new institutions and sites for male-male bondings like school, colleges, hostels, cinema halls, theaters, social service organizations, parks, clubs, fairs, and jails. From different government inquiry reports, same truth started to reveal by the 1920s and the 1930s. For example, during the 1928-29, members of UP Jails Inquiry Committee found homosexual behaviors in colonial jails, and they mentioned in their report. References are also found in a newspaper called Nayar-e-Azam on 12 January 1907 that in Moradabad in UP there were two clubs for the homosexual young men. Among the two, one was named as Jigri Club, which was formed by a band of quote-unquote pleasure-seeking loose men who had the taste of alternative sexuality. Sorry. Charugupta has shown that while in North India, public libraries and such clubs were the meeting places for educated homosexual men, labor class men were not outside this alternative sexual emotional world. They also got indulged in male sexual friendships. In the industrial towns in North India, male laborers often got indulged in alternative sexual or other perverted sexual practices due to the scarcity of female sexual partners. Because due to the lower wages, these migrating laborers from villages to the cities found it difficult to take their wives with them and were forced to live in distant industrial locations for long periods. According to her, this may have facilitated same-sex subcultures. In 1931, UP's Director of Public Health commented that the reasons of rapid spreading of venereal diseases among the working class men in UP were the adult relation of either sex and the other pervasive sexual immoralities. It is not very difficult to understand that here the term either sex referred to the alternative sexuality. Now, to conclude, it can be argued that vernacular literature like Chaklet or Chhele dealing with homosexual or queer themes can be used by the scholars in reconstructing the queer past or queer history of colonial India. If the homosexual or queer contents of vernacular text or literature are carefully used and cross-checked with other sources, it can become extremely significant. When sources or archival records are unavailable or on any unconventional topics like homosexuality or alternative sexuality, we should come out from the hangover of archival fever and instead should give focus on alternative sources like contemporary literature. And I have done. Thank you so much for listening me patiently.
Uh, we live in extremely difficult times, and sometimes we feel that maybe the way forward is very dark. But on listening to Apurba Ghosh's presentation, which was so wonderful, I congratulate Apurba on his presentation, and I'm very hopeful that the vision that Dr. Bhaskar Chattopadhyay had, Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay had, of making BVCK a platform for young minds to flourish, that indeed has stayed on at BVCK. Apurva, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Now, it brings us to the last part of the evening regarding this annual memorial lecture. And it is my great honor now to deliver the vote of thanks. First of all, I wish to thank our dear director, sir, Professor Joydeep Shorkil, who has not been able to come today and join us because of the simple reason that he is very ill. He has not been keeping well for quite some time. And therefore, we wish him all very well and hope that in the future he shall be with us physically. Thanks is also to our president, dear president, Dr. Anirban Banerjee of the University of Burdwan, who has always been a guiding light for us over the last few months. And my heartfelt gratitude towards Dr. Sukriti Ghoshal for starting off this session. I extend my support and thanks to the entire team for being there, Deeposri and all others who are part of this great organization. Thank you so much for your very silent support and the work done. I also congratulate and thank from the core of my heart Domrupani Bhattacharya for technical support. He is a very active member of our organization. Last but not the least, Rajarshi Chakrabarty. Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful presentation. We learned such a lot over such a small span of time. And Apurbo, thank you so much. You give us so much of hope about academia, about the future. So that concludes the 2024 Professor Bhaskar Chattopadhyay Srimati Kanika Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. We hope to be coming back with the 2025 Memorial Lecture very soon, and maybe in the physical mode. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for watching. Keep contact with us. Visit our website. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.